I actually love a list. Hello, and welcome to the PriceWriters podcast with Jeremy Keating and me, Katrin Townsend. Join us as we explore and discuss the world of insurance related books, offering our insights and recommendations. And I'm really excited today because I love a list. I don't know about you, how you feel about a big old list, if you have one on your fridge, if you organize all of your lives by list, or if you're the other kind of person who doesn't write a list, or do you write lists only to cross things off just as before you do them?
I'm not going to spoil it, but I love a list as well.
Well, today we're going to go into all of this depth because Jeremy, you've read the Checklist Manifesto, subtitled How to Get Things Right by Atul Gawande. This sounds perfect for a planner like me. Tell me all about it.
It is all about how, if you want to get things right, you should make lists and then tick them off as you do the steps. I know it's fantastic, isn't it? Why should we write lists? That's the big question at the heart of this book. One of the earliest examples in the book is of test pilots flying the original Flying Fortress. So it's a big 4-engine plane that the American military ordered. And the very first time they flew it to check it out and say, look, we've trained these pilots in it. Here's our new flying fortress. It crashed, which was not good, actually. Several people died because of it. It was widely considered to be too complicated for a pilot to fly. So it was crushed by an exceedingly experienced pilot, and he forgot a couple of steps in setting the aircraft up that caused it to stall soon after takeoff. Everyone felt for a while like this is too complicated to fly, but a small group of test pilots was like, well, actually, we ought to be able to fly these things. And they could fly them, but it was super important that they never missed a single step out in setting this plane up. And this is how pilots ended up with checklists. And in a modern aircraft today, it will come with printed copies of checklists, and they're also available on the pilot screens. So this is how airlines run their passenger planes, cargo airlines, and so on. They run their planes through checklisting. Why did it come up for the particular author of this book? So Atul Gawande is a surgeon in the USA, and he was researching ways to actually cut down on infection rates when doctors put in breathing tubes. So the infection rate actually at the hospital he was at was about 11%. So around 1 in 10 people that's given a breathing line would later develop an infection. And oddly enough, these things should have been quite preventable. So if everyone washed, if all the material was washed, if they followed the guidelines, took things out of the packet, didn't leave them lying around, etc., you shouldn't end up with infection. So he put together a list of steps people should go through in order to put the breathing tube in and not end up with infections.
So, what you're saying is that these situations occur when there's complexity, but not incompetence. People don't get things wrong out of incompetence because, pilots and surgeons and pricing professionals, we're all smart people. And it's not willful incompetence either. We're all trying to do our best. So it's this complexity in the system that these checklists are really trying to resolve some of the issues that come with that complexity. But it feels to me, I love a checklist, but I do think even when I'm doing a recipe that I've cooked maybe 2 or 3 times before, I'm like, I get the gist. I need that. You kind of have to adopt like a mindset of stupidity to follow these checklists, to follow a process, even when you don't feel you need it. Do you think that in insurance pricing, we have that much discipline?
I actually had similar reservations to you in the early part of the book. I was feeling like, wow, do you know what? All models are different. So can things really read across? We tend to want to be quite flexible. So although we are doing kind of the same thing each time, I think teams that run things as if it's a manufacturing process actually have often run into trouble because I don't think it is a manufacturing process. So I had quite similar reservations. But around a third of the way through the book, he used an example to do with how master builders stopped being a thing. This was the builder who would go around and check all the work and decide what weight things should be, how big they should be, and so on. All the little details on the ground when a building's being made to make sure that it's safe. And actually, what it was replaced by, which is something I had no idea about at all, is what we would consider to be the checklist that he's talking about. So, when you are building a new building somewhere, apparently there are checklists for people on the ground to go through, and then you've done the job properly. And all that people have to do is check the lists. So, instead of going around all the buildings and having to check the work, you have to check lists. Now, you have to trust people on the ground do the work. Okay, so there is that element of it. But the idea is that it's about governance and shared responsibility. It's actually about distributing power to people, but still having strong governance to make sure the work is done properly.
Okay, so I see how checklists could help junior analysts to build their confidence and reduce the fear of making mistakes. But can a checklist really cover every eventuality? There are going to be some events that just you never thought would occur, and you have to use a bit of professional judgment to deal with those. So, how does a checklist fit into those kind of situations?
It is a really good point, actually. Now, that is the difference between a checklist and getting into detailed instructions and regulations. And I agree with you that detail doesn't work in situations like that. But actually, can you step back and think about what is a short process that you could go through in that situation to make sure that the work is done properly?
Okay, so we're talking about small set processes, BAU, fairly standard procedure. That is when the checklist really comes into its own. So, how does this really work? And does that empowerment actually happen? I mean, I can see how a checklist could help junior analysts, but do we actually see that it does?
I have some element of me answering yes to that question, but it's not, I think, universal. So confusingly, he used an example about how Walmart handled the Katrina event back, I can't even,
2005.
oh, well done. Okay. Right. So the author says they handled it better than FEMA because they gave a lot of power to people on the ground. So, for example, managers could just break into their own store and give out the drugs that were in the pharmacy, for instance, whereas FEMA had lots and lots of steps to go through for people to actually really do anything. Now, I didn't think that was a good example because I don't really feel how the checklist comes into that one, if I'm honest. But I think he gave a better explanation. So, Van Halen, when they used to tour, would insist as in they had a big list of things that the venues had to do. And a lot of them were related to safety because they came touring with a massive amount of equipment and people. So they really needed all of these steps to be followed. And buried in amongst the steps was that they wanted all of the brown M&Ms removed from bowls of M&Ms that they had around backstage. Now, I've heard about this before as an example of crazy over the top pop stardom. That's not why they actually did it. And they kept quiet for years about why they actually did it. So the reason they did it is because they would arrive and be like, if they see any brown M&Ms, they would go round and check all the equipment. So they had people that did it, but everything would have to be checked and rechecked to make sure that the venue had followed the guidelines. And if they found no brand in M&Ms, they were like, people have followed the lists. And actually, these were big, massive setups. So there are times when it does work for what would be considered massive things. And it's kind of up to you what level you set this at, because your checklist can be detailed, but it can also be a much higher level.
But we're not talking about just setting up equipment. So, right now, let's jump back to talking about insurance pricing. A couple of Van Halen references for anyone listening who is old enough to remember that. What kind of situations in insurance do need a checklist? And how do we go about creating a really strong checklist for a big organization?
That's a spoiler.
Is it?
One of the big letdowns with this book is that it's got very little on how to actually create checklists. So, in fairness, it is described as the manifesto. So, it's about why you should do them. It's not a how do I create a checklist situation. But there are two types of checklists that he describes. So, there's read and confirm, and there's read and do. So, read and confirm is just to read through it and have you done all of the steps thing. read and do is read through it and do the steps as you go. So it's quite there. He does say that it should be things with sort of 5 to 9 steps. So that's something you can easily go through and easily check. You can imagine a committee can easily look at whether you've done 5 to 9 steps. You ain't going to get them to do more than that. That's not something you can do in a committee. In fact, 9's pushing it big. So it fits on a page. It's super easy to read. Now, one of the very important things here, which comes in with the building example actually, is that these only really work if they're involving teamwork. So if you give one person a checklist to do and they tick off that they've done it and give it back to you, that is not effective governance. Okay. So you check it together. So have you done this? And you work through it and you tick it. So that is effective governance because you know at least 2 people have checked these things when you actually hand in your checklist for people to look. And it's only what's essential. So actually, I can see times when you would be like, have you reconciled the data? It is essential. If you're giving me a model, I'm going to want to know the data's been reconciled. And once in a while, no matter how diligent people are about this, just like with breathing tubes, they will forget that. They will be busy, they'll be rushed, they will forget that. And then it will be like, the model doesn't work. Why doesn't the model work? Oh, the data wasn't reconciled. So actually, I can see this working.
Okay, so you think this really could work in insurance, even though we don't quite know what the perfect list looks like. What is the last totally avoidable mistake that you saw in an insurance pricing team that using a checklist would have prevented?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Okay. I usually talk about hypotheticals, but you've asked me for a specific case. So imagine a situation where in live, some postcode lookup tables haven't been set up properly, and thus every quote is returning the default level, which is the lowest level.
Ooh, not
Okay.
even a mid-level of default.
No, it's the unknown is going to the lowest level. Okay. There are several places where a checklist would have prevented that.
Tell me
Yeah.
where.
So, firstly, are the unknowns set to a high level? Should a lookup fail, is it going to return a high price? Yes. To be honest, I think just that one is good enough, actually. That's a check that ought to be in most people's systems. So is that set up correctly? And to us, that is quite a high level thing. So if something breaks, is a high price going to be returned? So that ought to be included in the testing. This particular case, which went wrong because of a translation between analysis and live, actually. So I can think of other places where it could have been stopped by just doing a bit more checking. And it could have been high level. The problem's in the detail, but the checking can be in high level.
Mm. Wow, yeah. I mean, that does sound like a big problem where a bit of a checklist would have helped. One reservation that sometimes occurs with checklists is someone will write a checklist for very good reason, and then they think of some more thing, or someone else adds something to their checklist, oh, well, don't forget this situation, or we need it to include this situation, or whatever it is. And these checklists then become too big. They're these like bloated long documents, or they're outdated, or there's some steps you always say yes to, even though you don't even use that system anymore. How do you stop checklists from becoming outdated and ignored? How do we make checklists actually useful?
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that's probably going to upset some people, right? So generally, there are not very many plane crashes in the world. Okay. I think a lot of people deploy mistakes in their prices. Okay. Is flying a plane harder than deploying correct prices? So I'm a bit like you. I was a bit like, can we really do this? Is it going to work really on the ground? Do you know what? They have perfectly good governance inside airplanes that mean that these checklists say about 5 to 9 items. They start with things that are actually useful advice, like fly the plane. Because actually, apparently, people can get so obsessed with a problem that they forget to fly the plane. Yeah, it's happened. Sometimes you can get so focused on the problem that neither of the pilots is flying the plane.
Wow.
Yeah,
Gosh, okay. I mean, it does
yeah.
seem like a good instruction, doesn't it?
Yeah. So actually, you've got a deployment error, right? If you had a checklist that you go through for finding the problem with it, that's just a few steps. But remember, you're a governance committee. You don't want to be in the detail of every single thing. If you've agreed with your specialist what 6 to 7 items you need to know that they have done, and it's not one person telling you, they've been through it, two people, actually, I feel that's surprisingly effective governance. Now, interestingly, the conclusion towards the end of the book is that checklists are not adopted enough. People do not like them. So only 10% of hospitals across the board actually adopted these things, despite the infection rate dropping from 11 to 0. Oh, he calculated how many human lives would be saved by people actually using checklists. And it's hundreds of that. It's a lot of people. A lot of people are dying because people don't like using checklists. No, pilots use it fine. They've adopted it. They know that it works. But hospitals, it's interesting because I think of hospitals more like insurance companies. Big bureaucratic operations kind of don't want to use these things. However, he used the example of surgical robots, which have been adopted everywhere en masse at the cost of billions of dollars. And despite huge hype around them and the cost, they've actually had very little impact on surgery because generally the surgery is too complicated for the robot. So actually, they're not used that much despite a massive amount of resource having been put into them. And if people had adopted checklists with the same gusto, lots of people would still be alive. So I found that quite stunning, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that is sobering, isn't it? That just following instructions is such a big improvement in very complicated circumstances as well. But bringing it back to insurance, you talked a lot about governance committees and also about deployment in particular. Now, some people might not be on a governance committee. Wow, also, you're living the dream. Some people might not be involved in a lot of deployments. So, for anyone in a pricing role, what is the smallest, most useful checklist that a pricing team could implement tomorrow, but not in a governance deployment space?
You know, it's really annoying because he doesn't use this example, but I thought about it. I was like, you could have a checklist before you send an email. Okay. So how many people have sent an email without the attachment? Yeah.
You can't do that anymore on modern email. It says,
Yeah,
"I've
you
forgotten to send it."
can. No,
Yeah.
it's not perfect though, is it? Only if you say attachment, does it no,
No.
it's not genius. But you know, there's other things. Ask yourself, as someone who checks work, what things do I always ask people before I even want to open the spreadsheet and look? What are the things you always ask an analyst?
Yeah, well, I actually have a list of them in my book in
Oh,
chapter 10.
there. Okay. So you literally have a checklist, don't you?
I literally wrote a
Actually, I
list.
remember now. You do. You do. So you've done this.
Yeah,
So
so for me, it is you always want to check your 5M. So that's minimum, maximum, mean, missing, and most common values. Double check what those are. Do they make sense for the situation? I always do a sense check based on some other information. Some people would call this a reconciliation, but I mean, like, at the most basic, if you have seen a presentation that says roughly that your product's GWP is 200 million, then you know if your premium has that many zeros or not, and you don't have to get into the little itty bitty reconciliation there, but just does this number even in the right ballpark? I remember one of my graduates sent me a spreadsheet once and I opened it and I looked at one number and I went, nope, and sent it right back to him
yeah.
because he had suggested that a burn cost for a single Land Rover was 1.2 million. And look, I know that I'm not a big Land Rover fan necessarily, but what had happened is he'd done frequency times severity to give you the burn cost instead. So he'd like massively overshot it. But just that one like sense check. The you in the right ballpark? That's always something I do. And the check to last time. If you have ever produced a piece of work like this before, just double check what your numbers said last time as a rough estimate. I think so often we do feel that this expert judgment that our seniors have is some like magic power, some magic experience, something that they've gained from all their years of wisdom. And actually, it's not. A lot of the time, we're just following a checklist of things that we know have gone wrong in the past and what would have prevented them. Experience can 100% be learned. Gut feel can be memorized from a checklist. So I am with you on this. More just sense checks on your data. That's the ideal checklist for me.
All right. So what I suggest, give your senior analyst that list. Okay. And before a spreadsheet gets sent to me as the manager, I want one of the senior analysts to sit and ask you if you've done these 5 things. Okay. They might not enjoy doing it, but how much time are you going to save?
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
even get the juniors to do it as well and get the juniors to ask each other because
There you
juniors can
go.
ask each other. We always talk about how important peer review is. Yeah, actually do it, you know?
Yeah. People use it in the building trade. They use it to keep your planes flying. Hospitals don't like using it, and therefore it's bad. And I can imagine a lot of our teams will grumble about using it, but actually it's pretty effective.
Yeah, it sounds like that you'd get the best of both worlds to bring in one more Van Halen reference. Oof.
I
Yeah.
think I only know Jump. So, and I lived during the era.
Okay, wow. Okay. So, Jeremy, this is like our own little podcast checklist, right? We always ask each other this one question. Would you recommend the book?
No,
Oh, tell me
it's way
why.
too long. It's such a basic idea. You can cover this in an article. It's quite a long book, and every part of it is really about telling you why you should use a checklist. There is a section that's about making checklists, but even that just feels really light to me. I pretty much gave you this summary of what you should do a minute ago. So there's way too little information on how to actually make a list, way too much on why you should have them. I think my advice is adopt checklists, but don't read the book.
Perfect. That sounds exactly the kind of summary I like for a book. Good job. Great. Next time, we will be talking about Murky Water. This is a book I went a little bit rogue with. So I think you're going to, again, really enjoy this one. Slightly off topic. So join us next time.
In my head, the music started playing.
Jump.
No, not that one, our
No.
podcast music.
Oh, okay.
PriceWriters transforms pricing professionals into the most respected leaders in insurance. Find out more about our capability audits by visiting pricewriters.com.